Tashirade. This is Conchognandro. I just wanted to say briefly, because I wonder about, misunderstandings and things like that. I use the word God a lot, and I find it to be very useful. I find it to be very practical and comforting, and most of all, it just helps me communicate Buddhism in a way which is friendly to all other religions. And there is this technical kind of, it's almost like anal retentive quality of Buddhists to be so picky about their expression of the supreme, and it's always emptiness, wisdom, true nature, great perfection, great transcendence, transcendent wisdom, egolessness, selflessness, nirvana, dharmakaya, always expressing that the what would be at the center of the heart of Buddhism, of what is the Buddha's realization, or what is our kind of final goal or terminus in terms of what we're trying to achieve, is always sort of unmasked as being without qualities, without qualities, and without any particular characteristics, and it's empty, and it's all these things. But the thing is that that's really not what we engage with. That's really not what we worship. What we worship, or what we idolize, what is in our iconography, is what manifests from that. So the Buddha is a manifestation of that. So we personify that, There is Samantabhadra and Samantabhadri, which are the Dharmakaya, and they're given bodies, and there are texts attributed to them. There are words of Samantabhadra, and so isn't that God speaking to us? Isn't that the supreme form, Dharmakaya itself? The primordial Buddha. That's what they say. Samantabhadra being the primordial Buddha. And then it's, oh no, we don't believe in God. And it's okay, you're being extremely technical to the point where you can't have a conversation with somebody about things that are totally universal. Christians feel devotion, they feel compassion, they have a wish to save everyone, which is so close to bodhicitta. They feel grace, they have confession, they have kind of initiation, they have purification, all these things. And it's just, we can't, it's well, they believe in sort of an egoistic personification, and yet it's okay, well then what about this text attributed to Samantabhadra? Isn't that an egoistic personification? Because Samantabhadra is speaking as Samantabhadra, announcing himself or itself as Samantabhadra, Samantabhadra being explicitly the male aspect, and even when Samantabhadra is portrayed as unification, I'm sorry, that's tangential. What's the difference between that and God speaking to Moses or Isaac or, whomever. Like, and it's just like, well, no, they believe there's this, like, God that can kind of, that has like a will, and it has like an egoistic kind of self-grasping, and it's like their God is personified as being more egoistic in some way. And the thing is that how else does the ultimate communicate with us, right? It's, if we're gonna create a religious tradition that worships something that is absolutely perfect, well, how do we begin to relate to that as human beings? Well, it's perfectly obvious. If you watch cartoons, we have characters that are animals. They become anthropomorphic, right? They become humanized, and suddenly they have language, and they have kind of all these sort of human egoistic traits that they're given. And it's the same thing with the Supreme. You're, the transcendent. It's like you're either in meditation, experiencing something which is beyond experience and not transmittable and not expressible, and you can't talk about it in terms that elucidate anything. It just starts being this kind of endless loop of jargon, because it's something beyond the intellect. Oops, sorry. It's something, beyond the intellect, and so what to say, and how does that communicate with you? Well, if it's going to communicate with you, it has to use, symbol. So if we're going to relate to the Supreme, then we create, the personification of that wisdom as a being. So it's really like a good analogy, I think, would maybe be to say, like, oh, those other countries, they have money, but we have value. And it's like, okay, but we still have to use some symbol of that value in order for it to be transmitted. And so we resort to the same tactics. We resort to having a being who is representative, a personification of the transcendent, as a human or humanoid being, speaking to us in our own language, in human language, and in symbols which are metaphorically expressive of the ideas which help us connect to something which can't be expressed. So Buddhists believe in an omnipresent, omniscient, supreme, perfect source of beneficence, of everything that is glorious and good and perfect. And they believe that it is in the heart of every human being, and they believe it is also the thing which gives rise to all appearances, which sounds like creation. So, do Buddhists believe in God? Well, I guess technically, maybe not. Do Buddhists believe in God? Yeah, pretty much. We believe in this source of all-pervasive beneficence that communicates moral, spiritual, and philosophical teachings in order to help us achieve union with it, and union with God, or, to be with God being kind of heavenly. There's just a lot of snobbery. There's an awful lot of snobbery when it comes to Buddhists saying they, don't believe in God, or they don't, the deity is just your Buddha nature, or your, like, the essence of your awareness. And it's like, well, if God appears to human beings, God appears, like, from their awareness. How does something appear without it emanating from awareness? It either emanates from awareness or you're unaware of it. So it's a lot of, like, kind of intense logic and intellectual roadblocks that keep Buddhists from just simply saying God when they're talking about the Dharmakaya. And it's like, if we could all just say God sometimes, when we're not talking amongst ourselves about our particular way of doing things, or our particular way of looking at things, if we could just say God as sort of universal shorthand, we would find a lot of friends out there. We'd find that we actually have, like, so much in common with these other religious traditions, and there's just a lot of support. And I have so many Christian friends, and I know what I mean when I say God. I'm not, speaking of, like, biblical thought. I'm speaking of what my own religious experience is, which is not from the Bible. It's from Buddhist scripture and Buddhist worship and Buddhist technology. I know what I mean, but when I say God, I know that they will catch the part of what I'm speaking of that they understand from their experience. When they say, when a Christian says, God spoke to me and told me to go and do this, I know what they mean. I absolutely know what they mean. I have a different experience, a different way of relating to the communication between the Buddha nature, and my own ego. I have a different understanding of wisdom seeming to give rise to guiding thoughts that inform my life. I have, like, perhaps a more expansive, relaxed, and open notion of God told me to do this. But the actual human experience and the execution, as soon as I feel like, something deep within me, something connected to that divinity, to that perfection, is somehow expressing to me that in my particular life as an embodied being, I should go and try and do this. I have that experience, that's real. That's something that I think any Buddhist should be able to relate to that, and so, like, if I'm talking to a Christian, I'll just say, yeah, God told me that I should probably do this. Instead of, like, giving them, like, a whole course on Buddhist philosophy of, like, what it means and to know the transcendent and in esoteric, in an esoteric Eastern tradition, it's like, Buddhists think very intensely about these things, and we try to become so refined and so precise and exact, and much of the time we achieve that. A lot of other religious seekers are very salt of the earth, grounded, go to church on Sunday, or go to the ghat and offer the candle. They have really fundamental, unelaborate notions of how they are to relate to the transcendent. That shouldn't preclude us from being able to have a common language, a common expression with which to communicate with each other, relate to each other, and find respect amongst each other, because I meet so many Christians that are so devoted. They're so devoted to God, or they're so devoted to Jesus, or they're so devoted to Mary. And what are those things? Those are icons of beneficence, of glory and grace and goodness and caring and compassion and kindness. And they have so much devotion. And of course I have so much joy in my heart that they found that. There are so many more of them out there that have found that deep devotion, that, like, purity of heart. than Buddhists, than especially Western Buddhists have found, because almost I won't say because of the philosophy, but I will say because many Buddhists are running from an Judeo-Christian upbringing that they found offensive or overbearing, and B, because of the hyper-intellectualism which a lot of people find attractive about Buddhism. It's intensely logical, like, oh great, I'm a very logical person, this is the correct path for me. And then they spend their time like really like cramming knowledge into their brain and never opening their heart. And I find for so many Christians it's like just almost immediate, because they don't have that like huge door of philosophy. That door of philosophy is there for like Catholic priests or people that want to be religious scholars. Then you meet those type of Christians where they are like very kind of big brain, intellectual, hyper intellectual, analyzing every word type people, and they have very, very intense technical ideas about what God is and is not based on the biblical scripture. And I find those people tenuous and hard to relate to, because they're trying to be hard to relate to. They're imposing all these limitations on what is or is not a religious experience through the qualifications of their own religion. And I find those people to be much less accepting, much more closed, and much more particular about like what should be done and not done. And then they can be overbearing. They can be difficult. I understand why you run from people like that. And it's like in Buddhism it's much more introverted and self-reflective, and so you don't quite get the same sort of proselytizing, but you do see many of the same roadblocks of no, the scripture says it's like this and it's not like that. And then that's where you get like kind of all the historical Buddhist debates between the different schools are always about like the particulars of this philosophy and that philosophy. And it's important because especially in the tantric tradition, pretty much any Buddhist tradition, there's the view, which is like kind of, what do you believe the transcendent to be, dictates your level of realization. And that's like kind of the top-down criticism. So like, for instance, the Mahayanists will say that the Hinayanists believe in emptiness of self, but not emptiness of material reality. They still believe in an absolute particle and absolute time. And the Mahayanists don't believe in those things because they like further express interdependence in terms of like, well, particles are made up of other particles, and those particles are made up of other particles, and fragments of time can be broken down further and further and further, and you can't ever come to like an absolute moment. You can't arrive at like what is the present, because no matter like how frozen things are, there's still like infinite slices of that frozenness to be had, and that's kind of like obvious. It's like, you have seconds, then you have milliseconds, and I don't know what goes beyond that, but the disagreements between these schools don't necessarily bring us together very well. And if we as Buddhists could communicate with Christians with an open heart and an open mind, I think a lot of fear could be diffused, a lot of confusion could be diffused, and certainly, you make it harder for casual philosophers to just declare that we're godless or atheistic or nihilistic, or we're not a religion. And B, you get to show somebody that will likely never want to explore your belief system some of the beauty that belief system has given you. So you won't, you'll never be able to share, the finer points of, Madhyamaka or Madhyamika with like a Christian or a Jew or some other, or a Taoist necessarily, maybe a Taoist a little bit. But you can share that deeper heart-based experiential experience of like grace and love and devotion and trust and faith and the feeling of care and being cared for, and in the feeling of the presence of infinite beneficence and love, the feeling that you are embraced, accepted, that you have felt the touch of something which gives you faith that this world is not merely just made up of material objects, that there's something more to life that is beautiful and profound and wonderful. Those experiences, like, you can like agree upon. And most of the time, when I'm out about in the world in my day job, and I'm not wearing robes, and I just tell people I'm very religious, and I let them take that to mean whatever they mean. And then if they go, I'm very religious too, well, then we get to have this really beautiful religious conversation. And because I know like a fair bit of the Bible, not like a great amount, but I know enough to have a kind of conversation about, it's like, well, it says in, this passage or that passage that, like non-judgment. I had a conversation with a Christian about non-judgment, and I said, like, I talked first of all about the fall in the Garden of Eden, and how, like, it's the knowledge of good and evil which separates man from God. And then I talk about, Jesus saying, let whoever is not sinned cast the first stone, and saying that to judge someone else is casting the first stone. It's saying that, I have some sort of moral superiority over you than other people, and she found that to be really exciting and profound, and like, wow, I never thought about it that way. And it's like, so I get to express essentially Buddhist emptiness to a Christian. I get to explain the middle way of neither judging nor abandoning moral conduct to a Christian. That's like that is so exciting and fun and wonderful and just a great time. And so if you're Buddhist and you feel like, I mean, if you're not like going to puja at a temple and you're just kind of like me, you're sort of like, you have your home shrine and you're doing your practice as you can, and you're striving for the goal, but you don't really have like a sangha around you. You don't have to be alone in your experience of being a spiritual being. There are like so many spiritual beings around you that would love to embrace you and to be a part of your life, even for just a moment, and so don't as long as you know what you mean by God in terms of your own Buddhist philosophy and view, don't be afraid to say God to someone, or Brahma, or whomever, or the Tao, or even the universe. A lot of New Age people will say the universe. It's like, obviously we're all talking about a transcendent presence that touches us. So just don't be afraid to have a discussion with those people. Don't be afraid to talk to those people and share your faith and your love of whatever that is. You don't have to go into like detailed experience. You don't have to go into like deep logical things. You can just talk about like the effects that it's had upon your life, and like kind of these universal values of kind of humility and kindness and care and non-judgment and peace and love and compassion. Almost any religious person will be able to connect with you on one of those topics. I mean, some of them are like super judgmental and they won't have anything of it. No, there's definitely absolutely evil things and definitely good things. I just patronize people at that point. Like, oh yeah, okay. I'm not gonna let that like not don't let other people's minds impede your devotion to bodhicitta. Don't let other people's minds impede your devotion to peace of mind. And don't let other people's differences, don't let other people's differences of opinion be the thing that keeps you from sharing joy in the source of joy. I love you very much. Sarva Mangalam. Once again, this has gone on for far too long. I'm sorry. Be well. Be happy.